Here's our recording is officially started for our week 3 session. So thanks so much for you guys that could make it, and it won't be too long of a session tonight. We've got a couple of things that I want to look at the canvas in a little bit more detail, just so we can start to compare two existing business models with that tool that we've talked about a couple of times already, just in passing, which is the canvas to see how it all integrates and works together for everything. So, our discussion board, as always, Wednesday, Sunday. This week we're talking about Netflix and Blockbuster and some of the differences between those two organizations, how they were able to account for things a little bit differently, how Netflix, of course, has a much different business model than Blockbuster, as last I saw, still has, because they're still up and running, but I think that they are really on life support at this time. So a couple of different things that you can look at from how they Blockbuster did try to get out and do some of those little self-serve kiosks, but they really didn't work out very well for them. I think they were too little, too late at that point in trying to make a bit of a turnaround. A lot of organizations could fall into that same category. Kmart is another one that just Walmart came up behind them at doing 90 miles an hour in the left-hand lane and blew right past them. And Kmart tried to partner up with Sears. Both of those organizations had one had a flat tire and one had a very bald tire. So when they put those two companies together, it went nowhere at all. I keep forgetting we do actually have a Target or a Kmart still here in town, and there's nobody ever there. I don't know how it still kind of gets along or survives. So lots of different businesses we can look at that didn't adapt, change, and see some of those things that might have been coming up from behind and surpass them very quickly. So models will change. So as much as we talk this month about find a model, now that you know all of the inner workings of your plan, now how do you put it all together? This is one iteration of potentially many, and businesses should change frequently. So the Blockbuster and Netflix one is certainly one that we can kind of use a little bit further in discussing that. So that's why we've got that one there. So the models in action. This one is an open format, and we'll talk a lot more about Cirque du Soleil and the traditional circus tonight. Open format meaning you can turn it in as a PowerPoint with narration. You can do a paper on it. Sometimes we do like a compare and contrast type of presentation. It's just one of those that if you're tired of writing papers, put something else together. But if you're comfortable with papers, then by all means do that as well. Just one thing that I would ask that you try to stay away from if possible is just doing like a recorded video where you just sit here and look right into the camera, because those tend to get kind of far afield and off topic pretty easily. But as we talk more about the elements that make this Cirque du Soleil and the circus so different tonight, I think you'll see a number of things that would be easy to work with and work from in your comparison of these two different models. I do think this will be one week that you'll certainly want to come back to the archive to look through some things. And I'll be very honest with you, because not a lot of students come back to the archive afterwards. I'll give you that heads up right now that says that if you spend a little bit of time with the archive maybe playing in your left ear as you're typing, I could be a big benefit to you as you put your assignment together. So just because I want to make sure that we're clear on how the whole process works. So I'm not hiding anything from you in the activity of your assignment this week. There's a lot of good content in this week's session. Your reading that you have this week is called The Blue Ocean Strategy. It's almost a synopsis of it. There's a couple of different books that are out there, and the Blue Ocean Strategy is one that it talks about two different types of oceans, and one is the blue ocean where everything is pristine and beautiful and there's nobody there, and the other one, of course, is then going to be the red ocean where everybody's competing for that same type of market share. Can you make it in a red ocean? Sure, people survive there, but it's not overly pleasant. It's very difficult. It's one of those things that you go to bed thinking about your venture, and you wake up in the middle of the night thinking about it, and you can't even wait till the next morning to start thinking about it, because there's so many different facets and things to be thinking about. So the reason we bring that up now, and you may have heard it kind of touched on a little bit at other times in the program, is because as we start to kind of finalize this model, is there a way that you can set your model up or your entire approach that may be able to take advantage of some of these things? Are there ways that you can, like the Warby Parker example from last week when we talked about eyeglasses? There's a lot of the all-in-one kind of big box lens crafters or Pearle Vision kinds of stores. So could they have competed there? Quite possibly. But then they'd have to deal with a lot of other things that weren't, one of the things that they wanted to even have on their radar. So they could be one that we look at with this blue ocean strategy where they say, okay, we're still competing in the eyeglass environment, but we're going to go completely separate from everybody else, and we're going to do a mail order type of system. So in the same industry environment, but they're outside of it. We talked a little bit last week about a lot of good ventures make these small iterations to things. So Blue Ocean is a little bit different. It says, well, it's not really a small iteration. It's going to be something that's considerably different. So back to the Warby Parker eyeglasses, mailing you 5 lenses or 5 frames to try on at home is considerably different than the big box store that's so common to everybody. So we always kind of say, well, how do you do things bigger, better, faster throughout a lot of the sections of the program? Blue Ocean says, okay, bigger, better, faster is good, but let's forget about that. Let's just blow the doors off of it and do it completely different. It's not incremental changes anymore. It's significantly different. And as we talk about the Cirque du Soleil model tonight, you'll see how all of these kinds of things come together. And the one thing that's very important in this perspective to be thinking about is that we want to, of course, increase our value and our revenue and the things that we're bringing in, while of course at the same time, don't have to tell you, reduce your costs, because that helps to spread that whole gap and margin out so much better. There's a little bit of a graphic here, pretty straightforward, just to kind of summarize it in a visual perspective. You could live in that fishbowl. Does it work? Sure. Will you get fed there? Of course. But it doesn't take long for that water to become water you really don't want to stay in very often. And you have to really compete for that food or the share of market or the dollars that are kind of being sprinkled around there in that particular marketplace. So by all means, if you can jump to the other ocean, things will work out much better for you. So the best way to do it, to talk about it a little bit further, is to look at this from the perspective of how do we put all this on a canvas. And again, this canvas is just one tool of many that are out there, but it's one that we'll use for the next couple of months. And this is one that's intended that you could actually take this and blow it up to a full size or a poster or something similar to that, or draw one if you have a whiteboard at home with different notes and things like that on it, and have these categories in it. And it's actually designed in such a way that you would just use the little the square post-it notes, because it doesn't take a lot of detail. So in a post-it note, you can't get much detail, and it's not meant to be permanent. And a post-it note is very easy to move and say, that doesn't work. Let me change that post-it note out and make some other adjustments to it. And if I change this one, well, then I can go over and change this one and make lots of other changes and things like that to the entire canvas. So next week, it's a pretty easy week for you, quite honestly. This is really your only assignment. You have your discussion board, and then you'll actually create this canvas for your own venture. And the first time that you go through it, it really shouldn't take you much more than maybe 20 to 30 minutes. Could it take you longer? Of course it could. You could put all kinds of thought, effort, research, and emphasis on this, but that's going to be things that you'll be doing the following month in your business model research course. Now we just want to get it on paper and say, okay, here it is from kind of a high level perspective. What can I do with it from here? So let's look at a couple of things here just a little bit closer on the canvas. As I kind of mentioned last week, we have this side over here, which is where we're doing things. This side over here is where customers are getting some sort of a benefit, as are you. So since the customers are getting benefit and you're getting the benefit, we consider this to be the value side of that particular canvas. So if we don't have the value side, well, then everything else is going to be a cost. So this is where we actually produce things, we pay for things, we figure out how we're going to measure all these things and put those two together. And as we kind of looked at that model or that example last week, things flow from over here and they come across the page and we get them out to our customers. So to look at the blue ocean side of it, well, we said we want to eliminate as much as we can our cost side and reduce as many of these things as possible, while at the same time increasing this side over here, which is our value side. Makes sense when we see it from that perspective, because we don't want to pay much for things, but we want to get a lot out of it. So how can we reduce our cost structure and still give more value to our customers? The airlines is a great example of this right now. I just saw, I happened to be, I forgot now what it was. It was an ad or something that, I forgot the airline, but there was like a $9 fare club. And I thought, well, this is kind of interesting. What is that? Well, come to find out, it, it was one of the discount airlines. I don't think it was Southwest. Might have been JetBlue. I don't remember now. But the $9 fare club, you can get discounted fares above the standard issue ticket price, but it's $60 a year. So you're paying $60 a year to decrease your ticket cost. But what I thought was interesting about it was that as you look at it, they also had some other things where you could get, I think it was a couple of bags for no cost, and maybe there was you could have changed your itinerary once or some things like that. I just kind of looked at it in passing, but it reminded me that airlines have changed so much that you do still have your traditional, airlines that are out there that are kind of the um, high end, for lack of a better term. But there's lots of your AirTrans and JetBlues and Southwests that are out there that have now said, you know what, it cost us money for you to bring 3 bags on this plane. It cost us more in fuel. You need to travel with 1 bag. We're going to reduce our costs. Well, in doing that, you think, well, this is, customers want to bring all these bags, but really, by reducing their cost and the things that it takes to deliver this product to the marketplace, for most people, they really have increased their value because now I can travel at a lower cost. And for some people, that lower cost is a value to them. It's a monetary value, obviously, but they see the value in and having to spend less to be able to get those kinds of things done. So those airlines and how they've gone through that shift, I think, is a great example of they've cut a lot of things out, and people kind of joke about some of that stuff that's there. But if you don't want to, if you do want to bring 3 bags and don't want to follow their model, you can pay for it. But for those of us that don't travel with many bags, we see the benefit from it. So reducing costs on the one side should help us to be able to hopefully increase the value on the other side. So what we'll look at first is I'm going to put the traditional circus on the canvas. So, they want to get this product out to their customers. So how do they get the circus out? Well, they have obviously animals. I mean, with the lions and tigers and bears and the clowns, oh my. But the Ringling Brothers Circus is the one that I've kind of tailored this from, is obviously a group that travels regularly. They travel by train, they come from town to town, they come to Orlando. I think it's only once a year. I know they do it sometime around in January or so. See the picture in the paper, they're walking the elephants down the street, et cetera, et cetera. But Ringling Brothers is obviously very focused on families. That's the customer segment that they're looking for, and that's who they're obviously targeting. So much so that they'll give you a free ticket for your first visit to the circus, so long as that first visit occurs before your first birthday. But they want to make sure that they can get families in. We'll talk about some other things that make them very family focused as we look at the revenue streams and some other things that are there. So they have a unique value proposition. What is it that this form of entertainment does that others don't? They have their performers and their animal shows. You can't really get those anyplace else. The other things that they do is they'll come around all the time with, the light up wands and the cotton candies and the big stuff on the stick that your child says, yeah, I want it. And then you say, I'll take 2. And they tell you it's $36. You think, oh my gosh, really? Maybe I really only want one, but now both kids want it. We'll talk about that when we talk about revenue here in just a few minutes. This 3-ring circus, the thrill and danger, you got the motorcycles in the big cage and those types of activities. And of course, you have the clowns. Those are the kinds of things that we think about with the traditional circus, the big top type of atmosphere that's there. So we look down here on the cost side of things. It's very expensive to maintain their animals. Of course, there's the organization that comes around and travels right behind them that says they don't take good enough care of their animals. Be that as it may, animals are very expensive to feed and to house and to pay the people to deal with the animals on a daily basis. And then, of course, when you have your star performers and the lady that swings through the air and the guy that walks upside down, they need some money. They're obviously not doing that for free. The guy that takes care of the animals doesn't need as much. You can replace that guy with the animals pretty easily. You can't find somebody else to be the main attraction, to be your ringmaster at the drop of a hat. Post an ad on Craigslist, you're not going to find somebody that can fill in for you by the time you move from Orlando to Tampa. So it's very expensive to make sure that the people that are instrumental in that organization are the ones that stick around there with you. So I mentioned that we talk about revenue streams. Again, the aisle concessions are a way that the traditional circus makes the vast majority of its money. Their tickets they're not cheap, but they're not overly expensive. And they do that so that they can still maintain that focus on families. Family of five can get in for, I'm thinking it was somewhere around the $60 range. Of course, it all depends on where you sit. You can splurge. You can get the VIP seats right up front. They'll even put you on a little train car that kind of winds you through the big top, the three-ring circus halfway through the show. You're the center of attention, et cetera, et cetera. Those could cost you in excess of $100 each. Just depends on what you're looking to do. But their main focus is not on those expensive VIP seats. It's on the people that are all over, even way up high, because we got you in the door. Now we're really gonna take you for the souvenirs and get your picture taken with the clowns, and let's buy all these light up toys, all of that kind of stuff. That's definitely where their revenue stream comes from, is getting the money from you once you're in the door, all the things that the kids want, etc. So if we look then and we change our model around just a little bit and some of the most important things, and we change it now from the traditional circus to Cirque du Soleil. And most of you, if you haven't seen one live, and not everybody has, obviously, we're very fortunate that we have one here in Orlando. And my wife's company, that was what they did for Christmas one year, was took the employees and spouse to a very nice dinner at, it wasn't Emerald's, it was one of the other kind of fancy places that was there at Downtown Disney, and then took us to Cirque du Soleil. I will be very honest and tell you that we have not been back since. I'd like to go again, but I can't go now because, well, I got two kids. And I can't leave them home and say, you'll never believe what I'm going to go see. So we're going to talk to how they're not focused on families anymore. They're very focused on the theater aspect of it. Families aren't what they're, worried about. They want the best show. They want this thing that's just like you kind of, they have a promotion going on here in Orlando about once a year, and the commercial hasn't changed much, but they reduce the prices when it's not tourist season, and they say because you're only going to use the edge of your seat, so you only have to pay a reduced amount since you won't be sitting in the whole seat anyway. It was a spectacular show. It was very theatrical based. It certainly didn't have the elephants and all of those kinds of things there. They're not worried about animals. They're talking about this artistry. It's more of obviously a performance. And this performance happens in something that's going to be themed depending on, which one you go to. There's a couple of them out in Vegas. I think one is based on fire and one is based on water that I've seen some videos about. So the theme will change around a little bit, so you can travel around and see different venues that hold this particular show. It is definitely in a refined environment. Well, here in Orlando, people may come in jeans. Typically, people will come, they're going to be dressed up. And the reason for that is because it's an event, it's a theater. It's not something that you do on an annual basis by any stretch. They do have numerous productions of this. The Ringling Circus has, I looked a month or so back, and typically they travel with like two different groups. But the Ringling Circus puts everybody on a train and covers all of the eastern seaboard over the course of a year. And then somewhere out Midwest is kind of the dividing line where another group goes. So it's a new show, but I think what they end up doing is they kind of flip-flop after the year. So they run the same show for probably 2 years, but in different locations. What Cirque du Soleil does is have numerous different shows in what is normally a standalone venue. When people travel to Vegas or travel to Canada or travel to Orlando, they know that the product itself, what they're getting, but the experience is going to be very different for them. So then their cost structure is, of course, on the production side of it. The venue here in Orlando was set up in such a way that it was a bit of a partnership between Cirque du Soleil and and Disney, because it's down on the downtown Disney campus or property. Lots of other kind of touristy nightlife kinds of things that happen there. So cost structure for them and building the facility was a little bit different. Vegas, I believe they're both housed in a very well-known hotel. So their main focus is on how do they create the show, the majesty, the big event that's going on there. And their revenue streams are very clearly from increased ticket prices. So as I mentioned that it's not something that's for me right now, and it'll be when the kids are too cool for mom and dad anymore. Then it's not a family that's coming. Then we can start to focus on the theater again, because as we'll see in a couple of slides, the cost difference is significant. And I keep talking. It sounds like I'm really cheap, but could I take my kids? Sure, they could appreciate that kind of thing. But there's a lot of families that the movies are about all that they want to do with them. We try to take them to some community theaters and those kinds of things every once in a while, because that type of art is good. It's kind of a cultural deal. But Cirque du Soleil is probably one of those things that we'll hold off on a little bit longer. So as we start to compare these two things, well, if we look at, what did Cirque du Soleil do? Is they tried to figure out, now how do I go from this circus environment? And some people that hear this might think, well, that's ridiculous that you're even calling it a circus. But as you read some of your articles, you'll see that this is kind of where the whole thing kind of originated from. They completely eliminated their animals, and for the most part, they've eliminated travel. They do, I believe, over in Europe have a troupe that travels around a little bit, but they're there for fairly long periods of time. They also obviously eliminated the focus on family, and then by doing that, they were able to then create this thing that says now it's more of a theater environment. If we look at some of the other things that are listed here, you can see how these compare, that the product might have started as something that could have been potentially a little bit similar, but by eliminating some things, we certainly created some other advantages in a number of other places. The one thing that does still kind of fall I think, very similar between the two is that little bit of thrill and danger. In fact, very timely, there was just an accident within the last couple of weeks at one of the Cirque du Soleil venues where one of the riggings kind of broke apart, and some people were very seriously injured with that. Some of the performers were. Not the kind of danger that you're looking for, but it's usually in a very controlled environment. It's just very exciting in that whole process. So we can see how taking some things away then allowed them to create things in another environment. So as we look at ticket prices, so Ringling Brothers is, I was saying, 15, so 14, just depends on the location, what part of the city or the country they're in, that kind of stuff. You can get some VIP seats. You can come all the way down to the front row. I cannot imagine paying $75 to come see Ringling Brothers and watch the clowns come out of the car, but people do it. Special events, that kind of thing, could be certainly something that you might want to consider that for. Cirque du Soleil, on the other hand, and of course these vary, but I took these from Orlando. Well, their cheapest tickets are considerably more than their standard tickets at Ringling Brothers, and almost more than what they consider to be the prime seats for the event that travels from country or from city to city across the country. So up to 120 bucks. You want a really good front and center seat, you're paying 135, and if you want that real front row seat, you're up to $145. Bit of a difference. You don't want to go alone. So it's you and one other, your spouse or a close family member. Just to get in the door, you're up to $300 for the evening. Significant difference in the way these two organizations are set up. Are they both circuses? It may be somewhat loose, but they're both definitely entertainment. They're both shows that last for about the same length of time. Last time we went to the circus, it was actually a little bit too long for me, to be honest, and I kept waiting for it to end. But you don't get more than 2 to 2.5 hours out of the whole deal, kind of from start to finish. So why would you pay, $61 for the nosebleed seats versus $14? Because you get two very different things out of it. You still have performers, but you have performers with other entities and things involved with it that deliver a much different product between the two. So to go out to the one in Vegas that I mentioned a couple of times, the Golden Circle there is $180. That would be an incredible night of entertainment that hopefully you don't soon forget. But what you don't get for $180 is the guy with the light up buttons that he's trying to sell you, and the big pole of cotton candy, and the free refills on the lemonade, that kind of stuff. So a much different setup and environment between those two different organizations that are there. So, in looking at those two things, and if we go back to, let's see if it's this slide right here, we can see that the two organizations may have started to be kind of somewhat similar. And as you read through the different articles this week, you can see how they started to kind of peel off and have some differences there. You can see how they got out of this circus type of approach and environment and moved to a much more blue ocean thing. I don't. What's the name of the book? Water for Elephants. Anybody happen to read that book or see that movie at all?
Mm-mm.
Maybe. It was a book that actually my mother-in-law suggested because it was kind of a history type of book, and I like those. But it was a good story. It was she read it because it was a love story. She thought I would like it because it was kind of a historical fiction type of book. But it talked about how the circuses used to be run in a very, very red ocean where it all depended on who had a locomotive that would run, and if they could get enough money from people to get enough coal to fuel their fire to run into the next town. And circuses folded and were bought and sold on a regular basis. Your high wire act could go to the guy that happened to be heading the other way on the tracks because he's going to pay him an extra, $20 in a year or a month or however it might have worked out. So the circus has changed. Really, it's only Ringling Brothers. I guess in some venues there may be even a Shriners Circus that kind of comes around, but that's a very charity-oriented type of approach there. So Ringling Brothers fought through quite a bit of the traditional circus thing to become the one and only that's really still out there and performing from a group of many many circuses that were traveling all over the country at one point. And Cirque du Soleil took that model and went in a very different direction with it, kind of from start to finish. So we've looked at the canvas a little bit and actually put an organization on there. Hopefully, and we didn't hit all of the things because, unfair advantage, it could depend on which venue we're doing for Cirque du Soleil and that type of thing. But we've got some really clear things on how our customer segments are very different. And that's one of the things that we talk about in the assignment this week is how do they focus differently on customers and how do they differentiate themselves between them. Revenue structures that we've talked about are very different. Ringling Brothers doesn't really care so much about the ticket prices. In fact, a lot of times here in Orlando, the radio stations will start giving away tickets a week or two in advance, probably if they haven't sold out. They just want to get you in the door. There's my sister-in-law just
Okay.
recently got a call from the cruise line. They said if you can pay the port taxes, we'll put you on the boat for I think it's 5 days. Couldn't believe it. Kept waiting for my phone to ring, and it didn't. But they knew that they were getting so close. They were going to sail empty and make absolutely nothing out of that particular space. If they could get her in the door, she'll probably buy a couple of drinks. She may buy some photos, all of that kind of stuff. So, similar model. They want to get you in the door, and then they hit you with the revenue stream of all the additional add-ons and that type of stuff. And that's really where the Ringling Brothers focus is. Cirque du Soleil gets you before you get in the door, and of course they have their souvenir DVDs and things like that later, but certainly not something that they're relying on too heavily for you guys to pick up when you get out there. Has anybody ever been to Cirque du Soleil at all by chance?
No, not at all. I haven't been.
Yeah, no, it's not something that too many
I've
people have,
been
have been to.
I've been to
I've been to
Ringling
circus
Brothers.
as well.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mauricio. What was that?
I actually have been to Cirque du Soleil.
Have you?
Yeah, and I think it's really great because it's like this whole new concept of a circus. It's not the traditional circus.
Right.
I really enjoy the part of it having a theme and each show being unique and different from each other. So that makes, I think it's, as an entertainment company, makes great sense for them because they can expand their offering, because people are not gonna be just one-time customer. Instead, if they have a great show, people who enjoy it will actually want to see other shows they have.
You know, and that's a great point when we talk about different themes, and not one that I've really ever hit on before. But I was talking with a student a month or so back, and he had mentioned like the Hard Rock restaurants and things that are out there. And you know, there's Hard Rock, and a Planet Hollywood was there for a little while, kind of doing some very similar things. And it didn't occur to me until you just mentioned that says, you know, if I've been to a Hard Rock in Orlando, and I honestly can tell you, I don't know if the Hard Rock restaurant is still here in Orlando or not. It may be. Was attached at one point to Universal Studios here, but you could see the Hard Rock in Cancun, and there's probably one in Mexico City, and I know there's one down in Miami. But a Hard Rock is a Hard Rock is a Hard Rock. The only thing that changes is the little name underneath, you know, the Hard Rock logo on the shirt that you might pick up somewhere. And I think that might have been one of the reasons why they don't have that same type of drive or market share. Planet Hollywood had expanded and tried a few different things, and it was kind of like, yeah, I've been here, done this. It's a kind of a, a tourist type of destination, but when you've been there, you've seen it, you've done it. Whereas Cirque du Soleil, if I go to another town that has one, it's going to be a completely different experience for me than anything that I've seen. You know, Disney is another great example. Not to keep talking about Orlando stuff, but you know, Disney World is much different than Disneyland, which is much different than Tokyo, which is different than the one that they have over in Paris. They know that they can't have that same product in all these different places, so they adjust and adapt their model. A lot of their stuff is very cultural based and how their model changes and shifts. And they knew that they couldn't just pick up Disneyland out in California and drop it here in Orlando. And he had a much different concept in mind when he started to move away from there. That was almost, you know, I've done a lot of research on him. That was kind of his first iteration. Not quite, it was bigger than a minimum viable product, but he knew that it wasn't what he really wanted it to be. He could see all the things that didn't go right. And that's why he came to Orlando, and I'm almost done. I'm wrapping up, I promise. And they came in and bought all the land here in the area, not as the Walt Disney Corporation, but as a bunch of fictitious companies. So they knew that they could get it at a much cheaper rate. They would actually fly in from different places. So they'd fly from California to maybe Chicago, and then one guy would come in from Chicago, another guy might come in from Miami, so that people couldn't see them coming in at the same time. How he decided to change what he was doing in California out in Anaheim, and really rework it, retool it, and adjust it to what he had planned to, or had envisioned here in Orlando, but didn't actually see it come to fruition. It could be another great way that we could look at how we can learn from some things that maybe didn't go as well as we had hoped, and figure out ways that we can adjust, adapt, and make some corrections for it. So questions about the canvas, we'll do the canvas in much more detail next week, so we can spend a little bit of time talking about that. Did the comparison between the two organizations make sense for you?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Sounds good. So the assignment is pretty straightforward. I just want you to look at a couple of the key points, the same things that we covered tonight, and just kind of put that back together and say, you know, how are their revenue streams different, and how is that potentially an advantage for one versus the other? Either of those kinds of things would work out. Sound good?
Yes.
Great.
Okay. So I'll go ahead and stop the recording.